If your grocery store looked fully stocked the last time you walked in, it's easy to assume the system is stable. But that feeling can vanish faster than most people think. All it takes is a few bad harvests, a transport delay, one spike in fuel costs, a weather event in the wrong region, and suddenly the items you buy every week are rationed, overpriced, or simply gone. And we've already seen the warning signs. In key food categories, prices have posted sharp jumps, while the average household has quietly absorbed hundreds of extra dollars a year just to keep the same food on the table. That's how grocery stress works. It rarely arrives with dramatic music. It shows up as smaller carts, thinner choices, and the slow realization that your normal routine now costs 15 or 20% more. So this isn't about panic buying. It's about buying intelligently, before pressure turns into regret. What follows are 30 grocery items worth stockpiling now, not because they sound extreme, but because they solve real problems: shelf life, nutrition, flexibility, and morale. In a shortage, those four things matter more than most people realize. And the item at the very end is still one of the most overlooked values in the entire store. First, canned beets. Not exactly the product people fight over first, which is part of the advantage. They're usually affordable, they keep well, and they solve a problem many emergency pantries ignore. Most stockpiles lean heavily on starch, salt, and protein, then quietly neglect micronutrients. That works for a few days. It works a lot less well after a few weeks. Canned beets bring iron, potassium, and a little variety to a pantry that can otherwise become painfully repetitive. And that variety matters more than it sounds. When every meal starts looking like some version of rice, beans, and whatever can you opened next, appetite drops. People call it food fatigue, but the real cost is you end up eating less than you planned, even when food is technically available. Beets can be eaten cold, added to salads, chopped into soups, or mixed into stews for a subtle sweetness that changes the whole dish. They're not glamorous. That's usually a good sign. The boring items people ignore are often the ones still sitting on the shelf when everyone else suddenly remembers they need options. Then there are canned artichokes, another item that sounds more decorative than practical until you think about what shortages remove first. Fresh produce disappears quickly. The expensive items go first, then the versatile ones, and eventually people are left choosing between what's available and what they actually want to eat. Artichokes help close that gap. They store well, add texture that canned vegetables often lack, and bring fiber, magnesium, folate, and antioxidants into meals that would otherwise feel nutritionally flat. Even more important, they make dull food less dull. Add them to pasta, grain bowls, soups, or a simple rice dish, and the meal feels more intentional. That matters, because morale in a food crisis isn't some luxury issue. If the food you stored feels joyless, people stop reaching for it. A pantry only works if you'll actually eat what's in it. Artichokes help with that. And because they're not usually the first thing consumers rush toward, they can be one of those quietly dependable products still available after the obvious staples have already been picked over. White vinegar is where this list becomes less about groceries and more about systems. A bottle of vinegar is cheap, stores indefinitely, and does far more than one job. That alone makes it valuable in an inflation cycle, because the best products are often the ones that replace 3 or 4 others. In normal times, vinegar sits in the pantry and gets used occasionally. In strained times, it becomes one of those items you suddenly wish you'd bought more of. It can help preserve food, clean surfaces when commercial cleaners are expensive or unavailable, cut odors in a small kitchen, and serve as a practical backup when your household routine becomes less convenient than usual. For just a few dollars, you get a product with almost no spoilage risk and almost no storage burden. That's the kind of math people should be doing more often in the grocery aisle. Not just what tastes good today, but what keeps paying you back 6 months from now. And if a product can still do its job 10 years from now, that's not just a condiment. That's insurance. Canned black beans with sauce are a good example of something many preparedness lists get wrong. They focus on nutrition and ignore compliance. In other words, they buy food that looks smart on paper, then discover later that nobody wants to eat it day after day. Seasoned black beans fix that. You still get protein, fiber, and minerals, but you also get flavor already built in. That matters when spices become expensive, cooking energy is limited, or you simply don't have the patience to manufacture taste from scratch every night. Plain canned beans are useful, but the seasoned version gets eaten faster and with far less resistance. Mix them with rice and you have a complete filling meal. Add them to soup and it tastes intentional, not improvised. Eat them straight from the can if you have to, and they still hold up. A lot of households underestimate how fast bland food becomes a problem. You can have 200 cans in the garage and still feel underprepared if none of it feels edible after the second week. A little seasoning isn't a luxury, it's what keeps your stockpile from becoming a punishment. Lard tends to trigger a reaction because it feels old-fashioned, but grocery math doesn't care about modern branding. Shelf-stable fat is one of the hardest things to replace when supply chains tighten. Protein gets all the attention. Carbohydrates are easy to find. Fat is where shortages become uncomfortable very quickly. It carries calories efficiently, helps with satiety, supports cooking, and makes otherwise plain food feel substantial. That's why lard matters. It can fry, bake, and add richness to basic staples with very little effort. It also tends to be cheaper ounce for ounce than many trendy oils, which means it offers something rare in modern grocery spending: real value without a premium label attached. In a pinch, it also has non-food uses, from simple lubrication to basic household utility. Products like this are easy to overlook because they don't signal sophistication. But when stores are charging 30 or 40% more for familiar fats, old-school items stop looking outdated and start looking intelligent. Canned spinach solves another quiet weakness in emergency buying. People remember calories. They remember protein. They often forget nutrient density, until the body reminds them. Spinach brings iron, vitamin A, and calcium into a pantry that can otherwise become heavy on grains, canned soups, and whatever was cheapest in bulk. Those categories fill you up, but they don't always keep you functioning well. The effects are subtle at first. Lower energy, poorer focus, recovery that feels slower than it should. A general sense that your body is working harder than necessary. That's the danger of nutritional decline. It rarely announces itself dramatically. Canned spinach helps prevent that slide. Stir it into soup, fold it into pasta, add it to eggs, or eat it as a side. It's not exciting, but it's practical. And practical food carries households through long stretches of stress. The best pantry items aren't always the ones that feel satisfying at purchase. They're the ones you're grateful for later. Ghee is one of those products that looks expensive until you compare it to what it replaces. It offers the flavor of butter, but with a longer shelf life and better heat stability. That means less spoilage risk, more cooking flexibility, and one less product you need to worry about refrigerating. In an unstable grocery environment, that combination matters. Anything that reduces dependence on refrigeration gains value the second the system becomes less reliable. But ghee also serves another purpose people dismiss too quickly. It makes simple food taste finished. A spoonful in rice, lentils, canned vegetables, or potatoes can make a basic meal feel deliberate instead of makeshift. That psychological difference matters. By now, you're probably noticing a pattern. The smartest pantry isn't just the one with the most calories. It's the one that prevents burnout. How many items in your kitchen right now are technically practical, but would become exhausting after 10 straight days? That's the gap products like Ghee help close. They protect both function and morale, and households that understand that tend to prepare better. Honey may be the most famous long-storage food for a reason. Properly stored, it lasts almost indefinitely. That alone makes it unusual in a grocery world where many products start, declining the moment you bring them home. Honey is naturally acidic, low in moisture, and hostile to bacterial growth, which is why it remains one of the most durable sweeteners you can buy. But the value isn't just shelf life, it's versatility. Honey adds calories quickly, improves the taste of bland foods, soothes sore throats, and has useful household applications when convenience products are unavailable. If it crystallizes, it isn't ruined. Gentle warmth brings it back. That's the kind of resilience you want in stored food. It doesn't fail easily. And in a period when processed snacks keep shrinking while prices keep rising, a jar of honey starts looking refreshingly honest. You know what it is, you know what it does, and it can still be useful years after many trendy pantry items have long since been thrown away. Shelf-stable tofu deserves more respect than it gets because it solves a specific problem very well: protein diversification. Most households preparing for shortages lean hard on canned meat and beans. That's understandable, but it creates repetition fast. Tofu gives you another option that stores for months unopened, takes up relatively little space, and adapts to whatever flavors you have left. That flexibility is what makes it valuable. Tofu can disappear into soups, stir-fries, curries, noodle dishes, or even blended foods if needed. It absorbs sauce well, which means a small amount of seasoning goes further. And when one protein category becomes expensive or hard to find, having another shelf-stable option matters. That's true financially as much as nutritionally. If canned meat jumps by 25% and tofu doesn't, your backup becomes a budgeting tool, not just a survival food. Products that give you options are always worth more than they seem. Canned green chilies are a small purchase with an outsized return. In pure calorie terms, they're not the hero of the pantry. In practical terms, they can be one of the smartest flavor buys on the shelf. A single can lift a pot of rice, a batch of beans, scrambled eggs, soup, or a basic noodle dish that otherwise tastes flat. That matters because flavor isn't separate from consumption. Flavor determines whether people keep eating the food they stored. They also bring vitamin C, which helps when fresh produce becomes scarce. But honestly, their biggest advantage may be morale. A mild hit of heat and acidity can make a repetitive meal feel new again. When budgets tighten, people often strip away these small enhancements first because they seem optional, then wonder why pantry meals feel bleak. This is where things get expensive in a hidden way. You don't just lose enjoyment, you waste the value of the staples underneath because they become harder to keep eating consistently. Premium canned sardines and olive oil are one of the highest value nutrition packages in any grocery store, yet many people still walk past them as if they belong to another era. Sardines bring protein, omega-3 fats, and minerals in a form that stores for years and requires no preparation. That alone puts them ahead of many refrigerated proteins that cost more, spoil faster, and offer less convenience. Packing matters here too. Sardines and olive oil give you the fish and the fat, which means more satiety and more utility. Eat them with crackers, pasta, rice, or straight from the tin. They're compact, efficient, and surprisingly economical when you compare cost per serving to fresh seafood. In inflationary periods, that comparison matters. People keep buying expensive fresh products out of habit while ignoring shelf-stable alternatives that deliver similar nutrition for less money and far less waste. Sardines aren't glamorous, but they're exactly the kind of disciplined purchase smart shoppers make when the market gets irrational. Canned coconut water sounds niche until you think about what stress does to the body. Heat, dehydration, interrupted routines, and poor food variety all increase the risk of electrolyte imbalance. Plain water is essential, obviously, but water alone doesn't always solve the problem if you're sweating heavily, eating poorly, or dealing with physical strain. Coconut water helps fill that gap by providing potassium and other electrolytes in a shelf-stable form. That can matter more than people expect. Mild dehydration affects focus, mood, and physical endurance long before it becomes a medical emergency. In other words, you can still be functioning while functioning badly. Coconut water gives households another hydration tool, especially useful during outages or summer disruptions when heat becomes part of the stress equation. It's not the first item most people buy, which is exactly why it can be such a smart supplement. Preparedness is often less about buying more and more about covering the weak points your default routine ignores. Canned coconut milk is different. This one earns its place because it replaces multiple comforts at once. It adds richness to soups, curries, rice, sauces, coffee, and baked dishes, all without requiring refrigeration. When dairy gets expensive or disappears temporarily, coconut milk steps in as a stable alternative that doesn't feel like a downgrade. It also provides fat, which helps meals feel more complete and filling. That matters when portions shrink or mealtimes become less predictable. A thin soup can keep you alive. A richer soup can keep you satisfied. There's a difference, and satisfaction is one of the most underrated forms of grocery efficiency. If a meal actually holds you for 4 or 5 hours instead of 2, that changes how much you consume across the day. The cheapest food isn't always the best value. Sometimes the better value is the one that keeps you from getting hungry again too soon. Peanut butter powder is a good example of a product most people underestimate because they compare it to regular peanut butter too narrowly. Yes, traditional peanut butter is excellent, and we'll get to that. But the powdered version brings its own advantages. It takes up less space, usually lasts longer, and gives you more flexibility in how you use it. You can rehydrate it into a spread, stir it into oatmeal, blend it into shakes, or use it in sauces and soups without dealing with the heavier texture of standard peanut butter. For households with limited storage, that matters. So does portability. A compact container that delivers protein and peanut flavor with less bulk can be an efficient pantry tool. It's also easier to ration and combine with other ingredients. In other words, it's not a replacement so much as a second form of the same useful idea. Smart stockpiling isn't always about picking one winner. Sometimes it's about owning the stable, space-efficient version and the comfort version, so you have both flexibility and familiarity when prices start moving against you. Canned butter is one of those products people mock right up until the week they can't find normal butter at a reasonable price. Then it suddenly makes perfect sense. Butter isn't just flavor. It's cooking fat, baking support, calorie density, and a small piece of normal life that disappears quickly when refrigeration fails or dairy prices spike. Canned butter stores that utility in a form that waits patiently. Use it on bread, potatoes, rice, or vegetables. Melt it into soups. Cook with it when other fats become scarce. The financial logic is simple. If an everyday ingredient becomes unreliable, the shelf-stable version becomes a hedge. Maybe you never need it urgently. Fine. But if a shortage hits during a holiday season, a transport issue, or another inflation wave, the households that thought ahead get continuity, while everyone else gets sticker shock. Continuity is often the real luxury in modern grocery shopping. Canned tomatoes are one of the best foundations in any pantry because they perform far above their price. For a relatively small cost, you get acidity, sweetness, moisture, and enough flavor structure to build an entire meal around. They turn rice into tomato rice, lentils into stew, pasta into dinner, and leftover odds and ends into something coherent. Nutritionally, they also contribute vitamins A and C, and practically, they help stretch other ingredients further. A little meat plus tomatoes can become a large pot of soup or sauce. That's exactly the kind of multiplication effect smart shoppers should look for. When budgets are tight, the best foods are the ones that make everything around them more useful. Tomatoes do that exceptionally well. They're not flashy, but they're one of the clearest examples of how a low-cost staple can save money indirectly by making other, more expensive ingredients go farther. Dehydrated vegetables are where pantry planning starts thinking beyond the first few weeks. Cans are useful, but they're heavy, bulky, and expensive to store in large quantities. Dehydrated vegetables solve that problem by condensing a lot of utility into very little space. Add water, and you have ingredients for soups, stews, rice dishes, noodles, and casseroles. Keep them dry and they remain lightweight, stable, and easy to rotate. This is the kind of item that separates casual stocking from long-range planning. If you ever need to reduce waste, conserve storage space, or keep a reserve without filling every shelf with metal cans, dehydrated vegetables become extremely attractive. They're also good insurance against one of the oldest grocery mistakes: assuming produce will always be available next week. Fresh produce is often the first thing to show stress in a disruption. Dried and dehydrated forms give you continuity when that assumption stops holding up. Canned chicken is one of the most practical protein purchases you can make because it reduces friction. There's no thawing, very little prep, almost no waste, and it works in nearly everything. Soup, pasta, sandwiches, casseroles, rice bowls, wraps. In a difficult week, The value of food that asks almost nothing from you goes up dramatically. It also compares favorably to fresh chicken once you factor in spoilage and convenience. Many households lose money buying fresh meat they intend to cook and then don't. The price per pound may look better on paper, but not if part of it expires. Canned chicken avoids that trap. It gives you ready-to-use protein that stays available until the moment you need it. And in a shortage, availability is its own form of nutrition. Food you can count on is worth more than food you merely plan to use. Salt deserves more respect because it's so cheap people stop seeing it clearly. This is one of the oldest preservation tools in human history, and it still matters. Salt supports hydration balance, nerve function, and muscle function. It also preserves food, improves taste, and makes many stored staples dramatically more usable. A pantry full of unsalted basics sounds disciplined until you actually try living on it. There's also the simplest financial argument of all. Salt is inexpensive, stores indefinitely, and works in almost every kitchen system. In a period of inflation, the products that still offer obvious value become even more important. Spending a few dollars on a product that can support preservation, cooking, seasoning, and basic bodily function isn't just sensible. It's one of the best returns on money you'll find in a grocery store. Very few purchases still deliver that kind of ratio. Ramen noodles are often dismissed because they're associated with cheap eating, but cheap and useful aren't the same thing. Ramen is compact, quick to prepare, shelf-stable, and highly adaptable. That makes it an effective emergency carbohydrate, especially when fuel, time, and mental energy are limited. A warm meal in a few minutes can be more valuable than a healthier meal that never gets made. The trick is to treat ramen as a base, not a complete strategy. Add canned vegetables, an egg, canned chicken, green chilies, tofu, or sardines, and you turn a bare-bones product into something far more balanced. This is where experienced grocery shoppers save money. They buy flexible foundations and improve them selectively, rather than paying premium prices for fully assembled convenience food. It's a quiet shift in thinking, but over a year, it can save a substantial amount. Canned sauerkraut brings something most stockpiles miss almost entirely: fermentation. When diets become more processed and less varied, digestion often gets worse. Stress doesn't help. Neither does a pantry built mostly around starches and canned protein. Sauerkraut offers probiotics, acidity, and a sharp flavor contrast that helps break up heavy meals. It also contributes vitamin C and vitamin K, which become more relevant when fresh produce is less available. Even a small amount alongside richer foods can improve how a meal feels. And that's important because food isn't just chemistry, it's experience. A pantry that contains only beige, soft, heavy items becomes tiring very quickly. Sauerkraut cuts through that. It's one of those products people either ignore or appreciate deeply, and in a long disruption, appreciation usually wins. Canned bone broth is valuable because it adds nutrition without demanding much from the cook. Drink it alone, use it as a soup base, or cook grains in it, and suddenly a plain side dish carries more flavor and more nutritional support. Compared with plain water, it adds body and substance. Compared with many prepared soups, it gives you flexibility without all the filler. It's especially useful when people are under stress, underfed, or simply tired of dry foods. Warm broth can be easier to tolerate than a heavy meal, and sometimes that matters more than ideal planning. Products that support appetite when appetite is low are worth more than their label suggests. Bone broth also helps transform cheaper staples into something that feels richer and more complete, which is exactly how careful households stretch a grocery budget without feeling like every meal is a sacrifice. Canned pineapple may not sound strategic, but sweetness has a role in pantry planning. In a restrictive food routine, a bright, acidic fruit can change the emotional tone of a meal. Pineapple also contributes vitamin C and natural sugars that can help when energy dips. More than that, it gives your pantry range. A serious stockpile that contains nothing refreshing eventually starts feeling oppressive. There's also a practical side. Pineapple works in desserts, savory dishes, snacks, and simple breakfasts. It can cut through salty foods and help heavier meals feel less monotonous. And unlike fresh fruit, it doesn't punish you for waiting a week too long. That reduced waste matters. A surprising amount of grocery overspending comes from optimistic produce buying followed by spoilage. Shelf-stable fruit isn't always as ideal as fresh, but it's often more honest about how people really shop. Canned cheese is unusual, but that's part of why it matters. During a disruption, dairy often becomes expensive quickly because it's perishable, refrigerated, and sensitive to transport problems. Shelf-stable cheese products preserve some of that comfort in a form that can wait. And comfort has economic value when it keeps households cooking at home instead of giving up and overspending on takeout or convenience food. Stir canned cheese into pasta, potatoes, rice, or chili, and the meal becomes richer, more familiar, and easier to repeat. That repeatability is important. The more often a low-cost pantry meal still feels acceptable, the more money stays in your account. People often think of comfort food as indulgent. In an inflation cycle, comfort can be a retention tool for your budget. If you can make home food feel satisfying, you're far less likely to leak money elsewhere. Canned salmon is the more serious cousin of canned tuna, and in many cases, the better buy. It brings protein, omega-3 fats, and broad nutritional value in a shelf-stable form that can be eaten straight away or turned into patties, salads, pasta dishes, and rice bowls. If sardines are efficient, salmon is familiar efficiency, which makes it easier for many households to rotate. That matters because stockpiled food shouldn't become a museum. The best preparedness strategy is still to buy what you'll actually use and replace. Salmon fits that model well. It supports brain function, heart health, and satiety, and it usually feels more substantial than a lot of lower-cost proteins. When pressure rises, the households that fare best are often not the ones with the biggest stash. They're the ones whose stash already fits their real habits. Dry lentils might be the most underappreciated bargain on this entire list. They store for years, cook faster than many dried beans, cost very little per serving, and deliver protein, fiber, iron, and B vitamins in one compact package. From a budgeting perspective, they're hard to beat. From a resilience perspective, they're even better. Lentils also play well with almost everything: tomatoes, broth, spices, rice, onions, canned meat, greens. That flexibility means fewer dead-end ingredients in your pantry, and fewer dead-end ingredients means less waste. This is where many grocery budgets quietly go wrong. People buy specialized items that require 5 other ingredients to become useful. Lentils are the opposite. They're useful in almost any direction. The simpler your pantry building blocks, the less likely you are to spend extra money trying to rescue them later. Canned corned beef is heavy food, and that's precisely the point. It delivers dense calories, protein, and fat in a compact, ready-to-use form. In a normal week, some people avoid it because it seems old-fashioned or salty. In a difficult week, those same qualities start looking practical. It pairs easily with potatoes, rice, cabbage, noodles, or eggs, and it doesn't ask much from the cook. This next category hits families even harder because filling food is what usually determines whether a pantry feels adequate. If everyone is still hungry an hour later, the math breaks down fast. Corned beef helps solve that. It turns cheap sides into complete meals and offers a level of satiety many lighter proteins don't. In uncertain times, that kind of reliability matters more than trendiness. Trends don't keep people full. Powdered whole milk is another product that benefits from being judged by what it solves, not by old memories of disappointing versions. Modern options are better than many people remember, and the storage advantage is obvious. It gives you milk for baking, cereals, coffee, sauces, soups, and drinking, without depending on a refrigerator or frequent store trips. That makes it useful in both emergencies and ordinary budget management. If you've ever bought fresh milk, used half, and poured the rest out, you already understand the hidden cost of perishability. Powdered milk lets you use what you need when you need it. That alone can justify its place in the pantry. Add in calcium, protein, and long shelf life, and it becomes one of the quieter workhorses on the list. Freeze-dried coffee isn't strictly necessary for survival, but preparedness isn't just biology, it's behavior. If 1 cup of coffee helps you think clearly, maintain routine, and avoid a miserable withdrawal headache during a stressful period, then it has practical value. Freeze-dried coffee stores well, prepares fast, and requires almost no equipment. There's also a budget lesson here. Small comforts often prevent larger spending mistakes. People deprived of every familiar pleasure tend to compensate somewhere else, usually in more expensive ways. A pantry that includes a few morale stabilizers is often more sustainable than one built on pure austerity. Coffee is one of those stabilizers. Not essential, but very useful. And sometimes usefulness is what keeps a plan intact. And finally, peanut butter. The most ordinary item on this list may be the strongest. It's calorie-dense, protein-rich, shelf-stable, widely available, and requires absolutely no preparation. 2 spoonfuls can deliver roughly 180 to 200 calories, plus fats and nutrients that make it far more substantial than many snack foods costing far more per serving. It works across almost every pantry scenario. Crackers, bread, oats, smoothies, sauces, powdered milk, fruit, or just a spoon. It appeals to adults, children, tired people, stressed people, and people who don't feel like cooking. That broad usefulness is rare. So is the price-to-performance ratio. Peanut butter isn't number 1 because it's exciting. It's number 1 because it solves more problems than almost anything else in the store. It's food, convenience, comfort, and insurance in one jar. And when you step back, that's really the pattern behind this entire list. The smartest grocery stockpile isn't the one that looks dramatic. It's the one that quietly protects your household from price spikes, empty shelves, decision fatigue, and wasted money. It includes calories, yes, but also flavor, flexibility, stability, and enough familiarity that people will keep eating what you bought. That's how real preparation works. You don't need to rush out and buy everything at once. In fact, that's usually the most expensive way to do it. Build gradually, watch sales. Buy what your household will actually use. Start with the categories that disappear fastest or rise in price the quickest. And remember, being prepared doesn't mean being afraid. It means refusing to be surprised by problems that were visible in advance. If this helped you think differently about your grocery spending, consider subscribing. And if you know someone who keeps saying they'll stock up later, send this to them before later gets expensive.